For me, one, it was so wild because I have to admit that, like, when we were on the ship, I guess I probably knew realistically we were going to end up with like a perfect horror film at the end of it. But then, it served my purposes for the book, I guess. I'm saying, like, I knew I wanted to write about that. And I loved writing about you and me kind of directing each other and acting and all that kind of comical aspect of it. But then, like, in the end, man, like, you actually had enough footage, right? That you had enough footage to turn it into like a trailer and to get investors. And then you went on and made a movie, which is, like, to me, one of the most amazing things is that in the end, like, that my book is coming out pretty much exactly the same time that your movie's coming out, about the same experience that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting that like, we made this trailer basically together on this ship, and it was pretty far out there, and I didn't really think anything would maybe come from it. And then I got back and we cut it together, and I'm like, wow, this thing's pretty good.
We're 300 miles from the magnetic North Pole. I mean, how desolate can you get?
This is killer.
This is the Arctic Explorer. We're alone on the ship. Is there anybody out there?
It actually hooked some producers. They loved the trailer that we made. The trailer totally worked, and all that stuff that you wrote in the book was real. We really did that.
Was it our winning acting? Was it our acting that ultimately sold your investors?
I'm going to say definitely not. A hard no on that one. But the concept, though, dude, the like initial concept that we had never wavered. They never wanted to change anything about two guys who are old friends going to make a documentary on an exotic cruise ship in the Arctic, and everyone disappears, and then they have to figure out what to do after that.
Your character, and we even knew this, like, when we were on the ship, like, your character was kind of like the traditional hero, like, okay, well, I'm gonna just like set my existential freak out to the side and kind of like take control of the ship, where my character was kind of just like off and like, succumbing to the horror or whatever, I don't know. For me, when we took over the bridge, I felt so nervous, man. I felt like a teenager. I was like, we're gonna get busted.
I had the same
They
feeling.
have a brig on this ship, man. So when we actually frickin' pulled it off and managed, I think because it was during a lunch break, wasn't it? Like the captain was at lunch, and we were able to film it in a way that it looked like you were driving the ship.
It's crazy. You could never do that on any other Arctic ecotourism ship.
We really had this ulterior motive. We were there, we're like, hey, like, I write for magazines, and you were like, I'm doing a nature documentary. And then the minute everyone had their heads turned and went to bed, we're like, we're like making a horror film, and like, the whole. And I have to say, I'm very happy that you liked the book.
I savored it, not for like, egotistical purposes, but I just really loved it. It was like, I never had a professional writer, take their time to write about an experience that I had with that person. And it was really fascinating for me to do that, man. Like an old friend, and I've known you since we were like 19 years old. So one thing that I found really interesting about your book is that I was in the moment trying to make both a television show, which was the reason I was there, plus our trailer for the horror film. And in these moments, I didn't really know what was in your mind, obviously. And when I when I read the book, your headspace was so different from mine. Everything that like we did, I totally interpreted it like a director, like, well, let's get this scene. I wasn't thinking about anything else around the world at all. And yet you're in this micro bubble, man, coming off your trip to Transylvania and dealing with your father's condition and all that. And it was really powerful to read that.
I feel like I'll probably feel the same way when I finally get to watch your film, like your version of it. I'll be like, oh, well, that's how you interpreted it. But I feel like that's the whole fun, right? Of like what we get to do. I mean, it's about perceptions as much as anything, like storytelling and
Absolutely.
you
And
know.
the parallel, I think, is interesting because on our trip to Rwanda that we did, where you were doing the article for GQ and I was doing a documentary, it's interesting how as a writer, you're in the moment, but you're not fully there because you're writing on your notepad, like
Mhm.
writing down notes to when you get back home to fulfill them and bloom them into an article. And I, as a documentary filmmaker, I'm holding a camera, I'm like I'm in the moment, but I'm not really, because I'm looking at the lens going, wow, this could be a great scene. You know what I mean? And then both
Yeah.
get back home, and then I go to my editbay, and you go to your computer, and like we have to like regurgitate this and turn it into something.
I know. I found like one of a really fun a fun thing about like watching your documentary about Rwanda was like actually seeing myself with the notepad, like writing about what we're doing. And like, I mean, you and me have kind of like had this really strange parallel in our careers and lives, you know, where we're kind of like writing about each other and filming each other and having the same experience at the same time and not having the same experience at all. And then kind of like being on tenterhooks about like, I wonder how he's gonna play this. So in Dissonance, you don't keep it entirely on the ship, right? You guys end up in Pyramiden?
Yeah. Longyearbyen is a little township of about 1,200 people, and it's the only settlement up in that area near the North Pole. And I went up there in 2015 to do a documentary called This Cold Life for Time Inc. And on that trip, they told me of a Russian ghost town about a 40-minute boat ride north. It was built in the 50s as a coal mine settlement. And in the late 80s, there was a horrific plane crash with all of the miners aboard, and their wives and children in the township suddenly lost all of their husbands. And so everybody packed up, was spooked, and just left the island within 2 weeks. And they left all of their artifacts behind, the kids' shoes, the spelling books in the kindergarten, everything was just left. And it's so cold up there in the permafrost that nothing rots. So I walked around the place and I was like, this is a perfect place to have the guys in the film land, like come off the boat on a Zodiac and go to this place.
Who's playing me again?
It wound up being a guy named Tim Griffin, who's been in like 40 films. He plays you, and then the guy who plays me looks like you. Doesn't look like you, but he has red hair. His name is Michael Weaver. But he actually wound up being not just the lead actor, he wound up being my screenwriter and the producer of the film. So he's my creative partner in this thing all the way through. I look back on it from its nucleus, like, you and I on the phone talking prior to the trip, coming up with this idea, just like brainstorming for a half hour. And we're like, let's make a movie on this journey, The scenes in your book were like the mania that we would experience, staying up all night till like 4 a.m. shooting this thing, and then sleeping for a couple hours, and then the bullhorn would go off at 6 a.m. to get up and go film polar bears, so we get like
I know.
I wanted to say, Jay, that it was an honor really to like be a part of your book, man. I've known you for so long, And to have somebody put their brain on something
How I hoped you'd feel.
for that long. Yeah, I don't know if honor is the right word. It made me really warm, man. It made me feel warm inside. I loved it.
Yeah, you became larger than life to me, and so it's a little disappointing to talk to you in real life now.
It really is. Well, I just wanted to get that out because I think once you see the movie, you're not going to be very happy with your character in the movie.
Jay, you're not going to be happy with it.
Chapter 24. Curled on the deck, staring sideways at the hypnotic swells. Dark green, rolling ocean, a heaving maze of ice lobbing upwards and slabwards, lifting and falling. My attitude indicators are all over the place. I can't tell pitch from yaw as I scan the horizon, looking for one of those black, calving bergs, the sudden thaw of memory. And yet, with the cold deck against my cramped side and my eyes pressed shut, I feel something small cave inward, a thin trickle of dread, a gust down a funnel at the long end of which I catch a glimpse of glittering indigo. Indignant indigo. Iris shot in. Fiberglass hull lapping the waves on a wind-tossed mountain lake, the blinding white of virgin sail snapping violently in the breeze. I see my brother's turbulent face, his collar flapping spasmodically, as if his head were stuck in a wind tunnel. I see my father cleating the main sheet, a crisscross of taut rigging and convoluted Baroque knots. My parents' new sailboat, a 14-footer, emphatically not a ship. Not so much as a cabin to take shelter from the sun, just a cranny to stow the life jackets, and beer-stocked cooler and a few bologna sandwiches. It was the kind with a removable centerboard, not even a proper keel. My father was from the Midwest, a landlubber. He had emerged from a 1,000,000-acre maze of sun-scorched corn set aflame with the Holy Spirit. He had never seen a body of water larger than the Wabash River, until he had met my mother, who had grown up digging for clams on the Great South Bay on the weekends. Her family had a small yacht named the Happy Hour. With a heaving sensation in my stomach, what my castrating Midwestern grandmother would have called the collywobbles, I can see my father gloating, one hand on the tiller. I remember the wind seething over the ropes. My mother wears matching red, white, and blue t-shirt and shorts hideously spangled with the American flag. Oh dear God, the 4th of July. I look back at the shore with a mix of terror and envy at the other families who had heeded the small craft warnings, and the colored bunting tacked to the picnic shelters tattering in the near gale. Scraps of grill smoke shredding westerly, dogs running up and down the beach, the sky a rapture blue, fathers with the day off and nothing to prove except their better judgment. As far as mine was concerned, the warnings on the Marine weather band were only meant for the likes of the meek parishioners he despised, and whom he only pretended to love when he was elevated above them on his pulpit. I picture him now at the helm, in his robes, billowing like black sails, snapping westerly. I see him easing out the main sheet, the blinding white line in his hand, the same hand he raised above us during benediction, the best part of church, since it meant it was over. However silly to picture him attired in his divine garb for this nightmare day on the lake, what, 30 years ago, I still childishly wish this were how he were garbed instead of his shabby day-offs, t-shirt, grungy shorts, behind the tiller with his blotchy scrotum clinging to the molded fiberglass. Even as I look on from this memory hole I've burrowed out from under the Arctic Sea, I resent him for too comfortably inhabiting the profane. Well before this day, I know the idol of my father had begun to tarnish. Even if I could not have explained it then, I can put it quite simply now. I had begun to fall out of love with my father. I had begun to detest him for his falsity, for denigrating his sacred calling, something I myself wanted more than anything. How could he squander it? How could he choose to give in to his basest instincts, whose only motive was to nurse his delusions, to shield his easily wounded ego, just to protect his central defect, the scabbed over hollow at his core, to malign anything that might expose him? For instance, Exhibit A, his own faulty offspring, we lame counterfeits, who by only breathing divulged the flaw. We, my brother and I, were the visible reminder, the glitch he could not mask. But even then somehow I knew that to bear one's humiliating wounds with purpose, even virtuosically, was part of the job description, the call of a real minister. A true priest ministered to his or her own wounds by letting them breathe in the open, letting them stretch wide their suppurating mouths to sing, to transmit the sacramental pain to the ears of the unsaved. A good pastor showed his flock how one's secret wounds must be exposed, loved, held up to the sun, and not kept in the dark to fester. Instead of performing the ritual correctly, by showing off his own wounds for the doubters to probe, even if necessary to be the hole that fit the nail. My father had filled his own with bluster. He should have attired himself in the hole, draped himself in that sacred, empty space that encircled the nail. But he had turned his shame on us, his sons, whom he blamed for our visibility, and with whom he was as vengeful and erratic as the winds that now caught us off guard and forced him to abruptly change course, to tack, hauling on the tiller without bothering to alert us. When my mother shouted for us to duck, and all had gone spinning as we scrambled from one side to the other to shift our weight, as we were now going on a port tack west-northwest, but the boat immediately began to heel. That is, we were flung in this new direction at terrible speed, riding on an extreme diagonal. In his senseless haste to turn about, my father had left the line cleated on the other side. The rope was out of reach. He had left it tied off on the starboard side, and now, overwhelmed, just trying to control the tiller, which he strained and pulled with all his clergyman's strength, as if he were plowing a field of fast-growing cement.